Colonel Ed Stansbury's affiliation with WKU began in the 1920s, although WKU and Ed were both born in the same year, 1906. About 2 months after Western's founding, Ed Stansbury came into this world, and I'm convinced, Ed, that you were the only baby in America in 1906 that wore red diapers. Ed Stansbury and WKU will celebrate their 100th birthdays together next year. How about that for simultaneous centennials? Colonel Stansbury has been active for WKU as early as his student days. And I mean active in the literal sense of the word. While at Western, he played football, basketball, and baseball for Coach Diddle, earning 3 varsity letters in each sport. And I think it's fair to say that the physical fitness and competitive drive he showed as a student here has served him well throughout his distinguished life. Colonel Stansbury served as an assistant coach for WKU's football and basketball programs. He also served as the tennis coach for Western, posting an amazing record of 234 wins, 47 losses, and 5 ties. That's an 83% success ratio. He later served as Director of Athletics and the head of the Department of Physical Education. And it was Ed Stansbury that solved a problem for Coach Diddle. You see, those white towels he was using were disappearing a little too often. So Ed dyed them red. And one of the great traditions in American higher education was born. Now you know that there were 2 men behind the red towel tradition at Western Kentucky University, and one of them is sitting right there, Ed Stansbury. You the man. Since he has been away from Western, a hallmark of Ed Stansbury's life was a service in the United States military during World War II. Then again, beginning in 1947, he retired from his military service in 1961, but he was still not retired from his service to Western, visiting campus regularly and making the trip from his home in Florida, as he has just done this week, for many, many years in a row. In 1998, he pledged more than $1 million to fund 3 scholarship programs to Western: the Colonel Edgar B. Stansbury Athletic Scholarship, the Edith R. Stansbury English Scholarship, and the Colonel Edgar B. Stansbury and Edith R. Stansbury Scholarship for Teacher Education. In recognition of his service and support, the 2nd floor of the concourse of E.A. Diddle Arena is named the Colonel Edgar B. Stansbury Concourse. In 1994, Colonel Stansbury was inducted into the WKU Athletic Hall of Fame. And one of the real pleasures of my service to Western these last 8 years has been my growing friendship with Ed Stansbury. No one has given more of themselves to Western Kentucky University than Ed Stansbury. He's given his life, his entire estate, and everything he owns to his alma mater. Our next inductee into the WKU Hall of Distinguished Alumni, Ed Stansbury.
Colonel Edgar Stansbury has been many things in his nearly 100 years of life. Student, athlete, teacher, coach, colonel, and businessman. Where to begin such a lengthy tale? He came to the Hill in the mid-20s from the Shepherdsville area, a 3-sport athlete playing for E.A. Diddle.
Well, the difference, I think, is Mr. Diddle, because he was athletics at Western when I was there. As a coach, he was tough, really tough. I was his assistant for about 9 years, one of the kindest people I ever worked for in my life, absolutely. But as a coach, he was really tough. And you pick that stuff up, you know, you live it, and it stays with you. in both spheres, both as an assistant and as a player. You knew the faculty. You knew when you were going to class. You knew we were going to have a date. And somehow or another, he knew all this about us. He was something, absolutely.
Colonel Stansbury earned 3 varsity letters in each sport and was an all-state performer in football and basketball.
Then the pace began to pick up in the late 1920s with athletes like Ed Stansbury, Arnold Winkenhofer. So he was one of the outstanding athletes in the early days of Coach Diddle's tenure.
Stansbury graduated in 1930 and spent time teaching in Lancaster, Kentucky, where he met and married his wife, Edith. The call of the hill was strong, so he returned in 1934 as an assistant coach in football and basketball and 3 seasons as tennis coach. One of his former players remembers him quite well.
We got to know Ed Stansbury when he would come to Horse Cave to referee basketball games. And then my brother Alec graduated in '37, came to Western, and I started coming to the campus because he was here on the Western basketball team. And then in 1939, when I graduated from high school, Mr. Diddle and Mr. Stansbury were among the big reasons that I chose Western. And from the time my sophomore year in high school, and that goes back a ways, we've been early on, I'd say associated, but then for almost 70 years, treasured friends, and have great respect, admiration, and love for him.
During his tenure at Western, Coach Stansbury ran up a total of 234 victories against only 47 losses and 5 ties. He was called to active duty in 1942 and so began his military career. But the story doesn't end there.
You know, he was right at the verge of completing the requirements for his PhD when in World War II he was en route to Europe and crossing the Atlantic on a troop ship, and it was torpedoed and sunk, and he spent 2, maybe 3 days there in lifeboat before he was picked up. He and comrades who were able to get on the lifeboat.
Following the war, Stansbury came back to Western as director of athletics. In mid-1948, the Air Force called, and he returned to active duty until he retired as a colonel in 1961. He then spent several years in business in St. Petersburg, Florida, but as time has gone by, his love for Western has only grown stronger.
Well, I think it comes from the leadership at Western. Dr. Cherry spoke a lot about the spirit. And when he first talking about that, you wonder what he's talking about. But as time goes on, you begin to realize what he's talking about. He's talking about all the things I just mentioned. The administration, the faculty, and student body, all of this over a period of time does something to you. It makes a different person out of you. It gives you a feeling of being part of Western forever, wherever you go. You never lose it. Never. Never lose it. And I've been in many places. You never forget about Western.
Through scholarships in English, athletics, and education, Colonel Stansbury and his wife Edith have continued their support for the university. To honor those contributions, the second-floor concourse of E.A. Diddle Arena has been named the Colonel Edgar B. Stansbury Concourse. Here is a man who embodies the motto, "The Spirit makes the Master." 2005 Hall of Distinguished Alumni inductee, Colonel Edgar Stansbury.
President Ransdale and members of the Board of Regents, Donna Smith, the Director of Alumni Affairs, and members of the Board of Directors of the Alumni Association. Ladies and gentlemen, I was surprised when the President called early on and advised that the Alumni Association Board has chosen me to be inducted into the university's Hall of Distinguished Alumni. Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to introduce my guests. Request you stand when introduced and remain standing until after the greetings. Request the audience to hold their greetings until the last guest is introduced. Thank you. My guests are Dr. and Mrs. D. Rowe Downing, Dr. and Mrs. Wood Seeley from Bowling Green, Patty Ann Brim from Shepherdsville, Mrs. Wayne Coulter and Mrs. Kenny Stout and Jimmy Cruz from Mount Washington, Mr. and Mrs. Dale Kelly from Newport Richey, Florida, special friends, Dusty Clark, Betty Gilson from Bowling Green, and Barbara Terry Porter from Rapid City, South Dakota. Last but not least, most certainly, my good friend and caretaker and companion, Daphne Lawrence. Daphne is from Jamaica, England, and has been with me for about 19 years. Thank you very much. I was born in Corbin, Kentucky on July 18, 1906. Western Kentucky State Normal School became a reality the same year. In 1908, my family moved to Bardstown Junction, a small community south of Shepherdsville, Kentucky. In 1926, I entered Western that fall. Early on, 1922, Western became the Western State Teachers College. From 1926 to 1930, I was a student athlete. I was influenced by Dr. Cherry, Mr. Diddle, and Mr. L.T. Smith, and superior teachers. I have lasting regrets for not being a better student. Dr. Cherry was president for Western for 31 years. He so often spoke of the Spirit. And the other thing, I know about the Spirit, I know what makes it, but I've never figured out what the other thing is. Dr. Cherry was 73 years old when he died in 1937. Mr. Smith was chairman of the athletic committee for 43 years. He was my counselor. Mr. Smith was 79 years old when he died in 1976. Mr. Diddle was involved in athletics at Western for 43 years. He was my football, basketball, and baseball coach. At the end of the freshman year, 1927, I decided I would not return to college in the fall. I went back to my old job of firing on the LN Railroad. Mr. Diddle caught up with me in Corbin in July at the Louisville-Corbin Freight Terminal, and he reminded me that football practice started the 20th of August. He said, among other things, I don't want to have to come after you. The other things he said, I cannot repeat here. But those of you that know him or knew him can imagine what he said to me. I returned for practice on the 20th of August. In 1934, 1942, I was a member of the Western faculty and an assistant coach in baseball and basketball under Mr. Diddle. During this period, I worked with Sweet Anderson and Gander Terry in football. Gander and I played football for Anderson in the late 20s at Western. Mr. Diddle is 74 when he died in 1970. Gander was 83 when he died in 1991. Swede, I don't know what happened to Swede. Barbara Terry Porter, introduced earlier, is Gander's daughter. In 1931, I married Edith Rupert. From day one, she made the difference, particularly in the military. We were married for 66 years. Edith passed away in 1997. Daphne Lawrence was one of her nurses and during her illness. Edith and I supported the university's investment in the Spirit program. Early on, we took steps to share our resources and made a commitment in support of the College Heights Foundation program of scholarships. I have been in friendly relationships with each president, from Dr. Cherry to Dr. Ransdell. In 1948, Western became Kentucky State College. During the tenure of Dr. Paul Garrett, the second president, he was president from 1937 to 1955. The third president, Dr. Kelly Thompson, was my classmate at Western in the late 20s. Early on, Kelly, as a student reporter and later director of public relations, was the first to focus attention on Mr. Diddle and his athletic achievements. Mr. Thompson was president for 14 years. It was during his presidency that Western became the university in 1966. He was 84 years old when he died in 1993. I have known the fourth president, Dr. D. Rowe Downing, and Harriet, his lovely wife, for over 60 years. Dr. Downing was president for 10 years. In fact, I helped Mr. Diddle coach Alec Downing, D. Rowe's brother, in 1937, and D. Rowe in 1942. D. Rowe was a member of the team Mr. Diddle took to New York in an invitational basketball tournament in 1942. It has been a distinct privilege to be induced into the Hall of Distinguished Alumni during the presidency of Dr. Gary Ransdell. I completed my master's work at Peabody in 1933 and did further graduate work at the University of Iowa in 1940. I was on the verge of completing my whole work for advanced degree when I was called to military duty as a first lieutenant in 1942. At Galveston, Texas, on June the 16th, 1942, I and 85 other officers for duty with the 8th Air Force in London was a first lieutenant in early 1942. At Galveston, Texas, I'm just repeating that, okay. 10 days later, after 500 miles southeast of Bermuda, the ship was struck by a torpedo, a German torpedo. It took 2 torpedoes to sink the ship, one at 3 a.m. and the other at 7 a.m. We were off the ship when the second torpedo struck. After 2 days in lifeboats, the civilians on board were rescued by a passing freighter. The military people were picked up by a Navy destroyer and returned to Bermuda, and then on to New York and debriefing and new assignments. We faced a court-martial if we opened or talked about the sinking of the ship. The next assignment was in the Pentagon. Later assignments were in the Pacific, stateside, and in Europe. In the Pacific, after the surrender of the Japanese on September 2nd, 1945, I was given an assignment in China, an unusual assignment. I returned to Western in mid-1946 as a football coach, head of the Department of Health and Physical Education and Athletics. It was during this period that the red towel came into use at Western for the first time. In 1948, I was recalled to active duty by the Air Force and retired in 1961 as a colonel. From 1961 to 1971, I was employed at Honeywell at St. Petersburg, Florida, and that's where I met Dale Kelly. In 1972, I was a special assignment with the St. Petersburg Times. The next 7 years was vice president of administration for a Bay Islands venture, a condominium complex in South Pasadena, Florida. In 1986, I was vice president of the company responsible for the management of the complex. It has been a great honor to be introduced into the University Athletic Hall of Fame in September 16, 1994. Having the second floor of the concourse in the Diddle Arena, named the Edgar B. Stansbury Concourse on April 2nd, 1998, was deeply felt because it joined me up with the name of an unusual personality, Mr. Diddle, a friend and a Western legend. The selection of the Hall of Distinguished Alumni by the Alumni Association Board of Directors is highly honored and truly grateful. I have been at the right place at the right time for 99 years. I have met some wonderful people. I have had some interesting experiences. I've had some few close calls, but also I've been very lucky. I've come a long way. For instance, when I entered high school in 1921, I believed that the area north of the Ohio River was a foreign country. It's a pleasure to be here. In fact, it's a pleasure to be in place alive. Thank you and good night.